Hi, PJ Hoover here. Why am I wearing a necklace with a bug in it? Because there are lots of bugs in Texas, and Texas is actually the setting for my debut young adult novel, Solstice. Today we're here for the second installment of our Solstice online book club. If you've watched the first video, then that's awesome. If you haven't, you can catch it on my website at pjhoover.com. Okay, so the question is, where did I get the idea for Solstice? I was thinking about what to write next, and there were a lot of fairy tale retellings on the market. And I didn't really want to write a fairy tale retelling. I mean, I love fairy tales as much as the next person, but what I really love is myths. And so I started brainstorming ideas, and I decided I didn't want to necessarily do a myth retelling. I wanted to do more like a what happens after the myth. And so I started getting the idea for Solstice. And that leads us into the next question, which is actually what came first, the mythology world or the dystopia world, because Solstice is a mashup of these two worlds. So the mythology did come first, and as the story started to take shape, there really was no other option but then to set it in a dystopian world. Okay, so the question is, when did I write Solstice? I wrote Solstice in the blazing hot of the Austin summer when it was well over 100 degrees for many days in a row. The thing is, I grew up in Virginia. I spent lots of time in Virginia and in Pennsylvania. I even lived in Chicago for a year. And let me tell you, those places are super, super cold. So you move somewhere like Austin, Texas, and you just learn to love the heat. And the heat sort of takes on a life of its own, and it soaks into everything you do. So when I was writing Solstice, the heat became a huge part of the story as a result. Okay, so the next question is, where do Piper's visions come from? So she has these kind of visions of slime and mucus and mold and stuff covering people, and the question is, where did those come about? And as I was working through visions for Solstice, a good question came up, which was, why is Piper the only person who can be the main character of this story? What makes her special? As her role begins to take shape, we start to see that she has this uncanny ability to judge people, to know what is right and what is wrong. And the mold and the slime covering and stuff like that is really the way that this is manifesting itself for Piper. The way that she is learning about who she is through these different visions. Okay, so the next question is, how do you write immortal teenagers? Because are these things kind of contradicting each other? And I like to think that they're not. So there are three things I keep in mind when writing teenagers, whether they are immortal or not immortal. And number one is authentic dialogue. Number two is relatability. And number three is emotions. So authentic dialogue, the things that come out of my characters' mouths have to really sound like how teenagers would talk and have to really truly be authentic to that teen voice. So that's the first one. The second one is relatability. And relatability is making sure that your readers can relate to your characters. So for example, Piper's relationship with her mom is like this really overprotective relationship. Piper thinks that her mom never lets her do anything, and I remember as a teenager feeling the exact same way. I thought my parents never let me do anything. I couldn't stay out as late as my friends. You know, my friends got to do all this stuff and I couldn't. And this is something that a lot of teens go through. Now, of course, Piper's mom is a little bit over the top when it comes to this overprotectiveness, and that is also what makes the story so special. The third thing is emotions. So teenagers have lots of really crazy and cool emotions going on, and capturing these emotions and putting them into your characters is one of the main things for making your teenagers and your stories authentic. Okay, so the next question is, who was my favorite character to write? And you guys aren't going to believe this, but I think the most fun characters to write are the really, really, truly evil characters. Because these are things, I'm not an evil person, and these are things that I never get to explore on a daily basis, which is a really good thing. So on the page, I get to explore them there. And some of these characters are the ones that Piper runs into in the underworld. For example, Minos and Sisyphus and Tantalus, and these guys are just like crazy evil people, and they just have like almost no good left in them at all. And so you can really just kind of let that crazy evil loose and let it flow. Okay, so the next question is, what was the revision process like for Solstice? And I want to first mention that when I was in school, I did not like writing at all. I didn't like writing, I didn't like revising, I couldn't imagine actually cutting words and changing words that I had spent such a long time writing in the first place. But as an author, revision is such a critical part of making your book become the best that it can possibly be. So for Solstice, there were lots of different revisions. First off, there was so much world building, and this was really building up the dystopian world and the mythology world and trying to make sure that there's just such a sensory feel to both of these worlds. And the thing I like about the worlds is there's actually like these two worlds that kind of parallel each other, you know? Each world has its own issues, each world has its own good, and they kind of track along next to each other throughout the whole story. So that was a lot of fun to do, and I didn't mind actually revising that because I was building onto what I had created. Another thing I really worked hard on in revisions is the relationships between the characters. So the relationship with Piper and her mom, the relationship between Piper and Shane and Reese, and building that animosity between the two guys, you know, Shane and Reese, and just seeing, you know, why Piper would be attracted to both of them. And it's for two different, totally different reasons. And just trying to bring that together was actually really hard work, but I believe it paid off in the end. So my biggest point that I would say about revisions is, number one, if you get something read by a professional and they give you feedback, listen to that feedback because they probably know what they're talking about. That doesn't mean you have to take every suggestion that they make, but you know, at least consider what they're thinking and see if it will make your story better. And the second thing is, don't take it personally. It is not about you, it is about the book and making the book as good as possible. Okay, so that wraps up our second installment of the Solstice Online Book Club. Thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for reading, and thank you to the Biddeford Book Ninjas for helping me come up with the questions to make this book club possible. Okay, so random thing for my house. This elephant, which is actually a really old whiskey bottle, and it's been in my family forever, and my favorite animal is an elephant, so this was always mine. Yes, the bottle is empty. No, I didn't drink it, and I think it's really cool.